Tonight on Diabetes Chat, we welcome Stacey Simms as our guest speaker. Stacey is the author of the World's Worst Diabetes Mom book series. She's created Diabetes Connections, a weekly podcast for people with type 1 diabetes connections in 2015, and has been its only host and producer. In November 2023, she launched a second podcast, Diabetes Connections Type 2. She is an award-winning radio years experience. Stacey's son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2005, just before he was 2, and she has been sharing her family's experiences with type 1 diabetes since then. Welcome to the chat, Stacey. I hope you're okay.
Hello, it's great to be here. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. We're looking forward to a good evening. I'm going to pass over to Flipper for the 90-second questions, if that's all right, Flipper.
Yeah, no, we call it the night. Well, hello and good evening from England. It's good evening. Nice speaking to you. We call it 90-second questions, but it always takes longer. But it's really just some quick fire questions, just so that people get to know a little bit about you and, see how things go.
You got it.
So we've already spoken from the introduction that you do wear various hats. So if you had to say what your occupation was, what would you say?
You mean currently or in the past?
Currently.
Yeah. I would say my occupation right now is podcaster, but also I would add, and this sounds kind of, I hate this term, but I'll use it anyway, community connector, because I've added events here in the US. I do events for moms of kids with type 1, which is part of my business. And I do a lot of in-person events, but I would say I'll lead with podcaster who also does events.
Oh, no.
And author, I don't know, speaker.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you wear so many hats that it'd be impossible. So from your bio, and that it's your son that has the type 1 and you don't. So if you had type 1, what would your go-to hypo treatment be?
I'm going to give two answers. So I would say when I would try to be responsible, I would say orange glucose tabs, which I know lots of people hate.
Yeah.
But my daughter, who does not have type 1, my daughter and we like the orange glucose tabs.
Ooh.
Bizarre. So I know. So that's, and in fact, I don't have diabetes and I don't have chronic hypoglycemia, but I do have, it's not a syndrome. I experience low blood sugar, like 55, 50 low blood sugar, about probably 3 to 4 times a year. So I do keep glucose tabs around. And we were at a museum 2-3 years ago, and Benny, my son, had to treat me, which he thought was very funny. He made me test, and he sat me down, and and then he gave me some glucose tabs. But if I didn't have to be responsible and I could just eat like a package of something, it would probably be like sour candies, Sour Patch Kids, we would call them here, or sour gummies of some kind.
Yeah, no, we have similar here. I think. Well, I'm assuming they're equivalent, but we also have like Haribo Tang Fastics, which are also like that.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, the Haribo gummies.
Yes, they're nice. What does your son use? I hope you don't mind me asking questions about your son, because I appreciate he's an adult now.
Yes, and that's a great place to say I'm happy to talk about much of him and his treatment and his life. There are some things that we keep private. You're not going to ask about any of them, I'm sure. But if I get to a point where I think it's something that he wouldn't want me to share, I won't answer it. So that's easy. Yes. He prefers juice boxes if he's home.
Yeah.
And we're able to get a 15 carb juice box and even a larger, like a 20 carb. He likes those. But when he started driving several years ago, he always hated glucose tabs. to the point where we would just get little fruit snack packages. He really avoided glucose tabs. But we live in North Carolina, and it's very, very hot here in the summer, so everything melts in your car. So we decided, I tried to find him something, and finally he just said, just give me the glucose tabs, which just shows you how much he wanted to drive. So he keeps those in his car.
Yeah, no, sounds similar to me. I have juices and full fat Coke at home, but Love Hearts, which I'm trying to think of an equivalent. I don't think you have an equivalent, but I know your Smarties are the little hard things. They're a bit like those, but bigger and sourer. Got a sour tang to them. Nice. But they're very good. If you ever get somebody to come over to England, get them to bring some Love Hearts back. If you we're doing a lot of imagining that you have type 1 here, so because we just adapted our normal questions. Do you think that you would want to be on a pump, or would you be happy on pens?
Over the years, I've thought about this a lot. I think when you have a child with type 1, and he was diagnosed so long ago, you can't help but kind of imagine. And so with the caveat that I truly have no idea, right? I don't think anybody who doesn't live with type 1 would know. I think I would probably go with a pump, but I would want the flexibility. He's taken a few pump breaks over the years, and I like that. So I would go with an insulin pump, especially we have we have these AID systems now that I just think are amazing. So that's what I would want to use.
Yeah. And also, not that I've ever taken a pump break, but I did inject for, oh goodness, how many years? 13, 14 years. So I sort of remember. I think in some ways it's quite good, because if I had to go back onto injections, it'd be quite scary now.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This is such a common thing, especially certainly for adults, but for kids, I've met a lot of families where the child, like my son, was diagnosed tiny, got very used to shots, but switched to an insulin pump at a young age and didn't remember getting used to shots. So at age like 8, 9, 10, needed shots for some reason and was terrified. So that can be really difficult.
Yeah. It's not so much the injections, it should be like how much background and things, because it's a long time ago.
Right. Sure.
But I'm sure I'd be fine. We're pretty hardy. Now, you say that you experience form of hypo anyway, even though they're not insulin induced.
Right.
So, but having seen obviously with your son and other people, which do you think would be worse, a hypo or a hyper? But also, as a parent, which do you fear most? But I don't like using the word fear.
Yeah, I don't fear it. I really don't. I mean, fear is I don't know. There are some things I'm still fearful about, but I agree with you. I think that's a tough word. We respect it, right? We respect it. I again, having never really felt high, I would think feeling low just seems worse. My son, he seems to be able to power through when he's high, but being low stops him.
Yeah.
So I'm going to guess that, but truly, and as a parent, in the moment, those lower blood sugars are certainly have more urgency. It's when, and I don't know, I'm sure many of you can relate. It's when they are tweens and teenagers, when you're thinking, how are they going to be high all the time? Like, how many highs are we dealing with? That's when I find that the hyperglycemia really starts worrying me. I was much more concerned about that when he was in middle school, frankly, because he would forget boluses, and we've talked about that a lot on the podcast. It's just when you're in middle school, and teenagers, you don't really have the best brain power, so he would forget a lot.
Not just teenagers, can I just tell you that?
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody forgets boluses, right? It's just when it happens all the time, it was a little scary for us as in the teenage years, I would say.
I think a lot of things for teenagers are scary. So just adding in an extra.
I actually put on a new Dexcom today. Left the old one on. Then went to pair it, sync it, whatever you do. Went about my life for the next hour to then realize my alarm was going off, and then I realized to go, I forgot to put the transmitter in. Like,
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever done that. Like, these things happen in life, right? These little things, like you forget to go this, or
100%.
you forget something, or it's just the norm of part and parcel of living with diabetes, I guess. And it's how you respond to after that, isn't it, I guess?
Well, you think about it, did you ever leave your phone someplace? Did you ever lose your keys?
Yeah.
It's part of living. And so I think it's in an interesting way. I don't want to sound too Pollyannish, like too positive, but I think sometimes that's a sign that you're comfortable with diabetes. Like, it really is part of your life when you start forgetting
Yeah.
stuff.
It is. I think the injecting, it always amuses me when an occasion you do just forget. And for me, it's usually just if you're, do you know, like the phone rings just when, at that time when I'm in the kitchen, when I'd normally think about bolusing.
Right.
And then I answer the phone, and then bolusing's gone from my head because whatever. And it just gets me that after 30 years, you'd think I'd remember. You know, sort of like, surely at this point you think something was wrong. Right. Within the diabetes being within your family, can you tell me one thing that you think it's brought that's a positive? Sorry if I'm wandering around at the moment because I've just gone to low battery. And one thing that's a negative for you.
I would say the best thing about diabetes is the community that it brings. There's just no doubt that we've met so many people over these 17 years that we never would have met, that I feel so supported and taken care of. I can call people. I mean, here I am talking to you. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? But I have moms and friends that I can call anytime. I know so many great people with diabetes that my son can lean on. I would also say I think he might be a little embarrassed about this, but I think he'd be okay with it. I do think that I've had a more closer physical relationship with my son. You know, and maybe we would always be that way, but he's a big hugger. You know, he's really comfortable having me around. And I don't know, I feel like I've been, you know, doing infusion sets and touching him to stab him since he was a baby. So he got more comfortable with that. But I don't know. I mean, my daughter is very affectionate as well. She doesn't have diabetes, so I don't know. But that's one thing I do like. And then I don't like, I mean, look, I don't know if this is what you're asking. I don't like the risk of complications and the risk of health issues and, you know, the other big picture scary things that we have to acknowledge with diabetes. One thing that brings me comfort, you know, dark humor sort of way, is, you know, life is full of complications with or without diabetes. Yeah. So you never know what's going to happen. I'm a pretty healthy person, knock on wood. I've done what I'm quote unquote supposed to do. And I got an autoimmune condition when I was in my early 40s. I have ulcerative colitis. And, you know, so you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's quite true, because like I've had type 1 nearly 30 years now. I'm coming up in a few months. And with my eyes, I've had no real diabetes problem, but there's a member of my family who's had retinopathy, but not diabetic retinopathy. And you just
see,
what are the chances? I spent my whole life trying to reduce my risks of this, and this person just. And when they said, I was like, oh, and they had to have laser and stuff, and I was like, oh no, I know about it.
Oh my gosh!
And you know how then it sort of brought to me, like you say, everybody's got a risk of things. All we can do is try and reduce that risk.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Nobody gets out of here alive anyway. Which I know, like I said, dark humor. But you've got to have that.
Yeah. And do you love or hate the smell of insulin?
I'm going to be neutral on this. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I know people who absolutely hate it. I just think it's there. I like that it has a smell because occasionally, a lot less frequently than in the past, but when a site is leaking, Benny can smell it pretty quickly. And that happened a lot when he was younger and used to, I don't know, in puberty, he went, his doses were so high that his infusion sets just couldn't handle it. So his sets were leaking all the time. And we actually switched to an untethered regimen because of that. And I'm happy to talk about it, but we knew it because he could smell. I don't smell it, but he could smell the insulin. So, and that just happened about 2 nights ago. He was like, we were talking in the kitchen. He's like, wait a minute. And it was his So
Yeah.
this site.
I'd never thought of that side. It was one of the consultants, I think it was Nick Oliver. He brought that up on because insulin doesn't smell. It's like the preservatives and the things.
Right. Yeah.
But also it's good because you can smell if it's leaking. And I'd never thought of that. I knew it was the preservatives that smell, but I'd never thought the fact that it smelt was an advantage. And the last of our quick, obviously we've done it in 90 seconds, things. If you're on a desert island, what 3 things would you take with you? Now, I'm going to put a proviso on this because it's quite a bougie desert island in the fact that any medical supplies or anything like that are already there.
Oh, okay. Because
So,
I was going to say, I can't, I actually avoid questions like this. Like someone says, how would you manage the zombie apocalypse? I'm like, I don't answer. So if all the medical stuff is there,
yeah. So
I would take something that could play music.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully something that could give me more than one book, something to read.
I know modern day it's a bit like, yes, I'll have an old-fashioned Kindle with everything.
Yes. And oh my goodness, desert island. What else would I take? Books, music. What else do you need? Chocolate, maybe.
Yeah, I was just going to say something nice to eat. You
Yeah.
need shellfish is not going to last forever. Is it? All right. Well, thanks for that, Stacey. That was really interesting. I'm going to hand you back over to Claire now.
Great.
Thanks, Philippa. Stacey, can you tell the diabetes chat community a little bit about your son's diagnosis? Whatever
Sure.
you feel comfortable telling us.
Yeah. So he was diagnosed at 23 months, right before he turned 2. And we had seen some weird symptoms, as you can imagine, pretty much the prior month. He would have really wet diapers. He was still in diapers. He would drink, all the standard stuff. But then he would go 2 or 3 days being totally fine. But then he would have 2 or 3 days of not being fine. So I called our pediatrician. At the time, I knew I was a TV health reporter, and then I was a radio health reporter. And I knew just enough to know that this could be type 1 diabetes, although I'm sure I didn't use those words. And I called the pediatrician on a Friday, and she said she had never seen juvenile diabetes in a child younger than 2, so that we should bring him in on Monday and rule it out. And we were like, all right, sounds good. So we brought him in on Monday, and his fasting glucose was 80. So they were very confused and took a blood sample. They didn't tell me they were doing an A1C. I didn't know anything about that at the time. They just said we have to run some more tests. He had a urinary tract infection, so they gave him antibiotics, and he immediately felt a lot better. So we thought we were in the clear. But a pediatrician friend of mine, not that pediatrician, at the bus stop the next day, my daughter was in kindergarten at the time, said to me, look, I'm glad he's feeling better, but I don't know why a 2-year-old boy would get a urinary tract infection. So please follow up on this. And I thought, oh boy, that makes a lot of sense. So it was a few days later, it took almost a full week. They called us and had gotten the blood results back, and his A1C was 11.5. And they said, you need to go to the hospital. And that's what we did. He felt great on the day we went to the hospital. He was happy. He was not happy to be in the hospital. He was an active, almost 2-year-old little boy. So, but when we got there, we were very fortunate because he didn't even have large ketones. He was not in DKA. Oh, he probably did have large ketones, but he wasn't in DKA. And like I said, he felt really good. So they got him in a safe space pretty quickly.
Okay. Did you find once he'd had the diagnosis of type 1, did you find it hard to support him with the management of the diabetes?
It's a great question because the answer is it was absolutely difficult, and it was also really simple because he was 23 months old. He was not going to do anything for himself. So we knew that we had to really support him as a family and do everything for him. But the first 2 weeks were horrible because they kept us in the hospital for 3 days. They taught us what we needed to know, and then they kick you out and send you home. I had a couple of people that I actually knew in Charlotte through my radio job, through my health reporting job, that had type 1 kids, so I was able to call them just for support, but they didn't really live close to me. So the first 2 weeks were terrible because he didn't understand why he was getting shots. We couldn't tell him that he was going to feel better. He was too young to understand. So in his perspective, everybody who loved him was now stabbing him and hurting him. So it took about 2 weeks before he got used to it, and that was horrible emotionally. We tried to put on a strong face, and we're gonna just we would basically hold him down, like, here's a big hug and here's a shot, but it was an interesting time too, because he was diagnosed right after Lantus was approved in the United States for 2-year-olds, for down to 2 years old. So we were able to use that. I don't know what it was like in 2006 where you guys are, but before that, he would have been on the exchange program, which would have been, I don't know, 1 or 2 shots a day, and then you would eat scheduled meals. So this way, we were able to do multiple daily injections. So he would have Lantus once a day, and he would have Humalog or Novolog, I can't remember what we started out with, when he ate. And the 2-year-old likes to graze, so we were able to give him, we gave him like 8 shots a day. And he was perfectly happy with that after he got used to it. He would, as long as he didn't have to stop playing, he would stick out his hand, his arm, he would stick out his leg, and we learned he was ambidextrous, which we didn't know. So it was actually, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was much easier after those first 2 weeks. And he did well. I mean, he didn't know any different, right? What do you remember from 2 years old? And I actually found a lot of comfort in that. I would tell myself that all the time. He's not going to remember this. You're going to be okay.
And how did you feel at the time of his diagnosis? It must have been quite stressful for you.
I think that we were devastated, but we were also in a weird way kind of relieved, because in the 2 weeks before his diagnosis, we had foolishly started Googling things. And especially when his fasting glucose came back at 80, I was really nervous that it was something really horrible with his kidneys or something really horrible that would not be treatable. So when I found out that it was type 1 diabetes, and I knew people who were living with that, it was a bit of a relief to know, okay, we can manage this, even though this is a devastating diagnosis. So the biggest challenge in the short term, frankly, was that my husband and I both worked. And he owned a restaurant, and I did very early mornings at a radio station. So I was considering quitting my job, but I was the one who has health insurance. Our private health insurance system over here is rather difficult. And being a restaurant owner, we would have had to buy, actually, it was 2006. I don't think you could have bought insurance on the marketplace. This is before Obamacare. I don't know what we would have done. So I decided to stay at my job and see how it went. Plus, it was my dream job. I absolutely loved it. So that was very, very difficult for both of us. But we were super lucky and we already had childcare, and they were willing. It was a daycare center, and they were willing to learn. One of the people there actually had a little bit of medical experience, but they weren't a healthcare provider, but they had some training, and they said, "Sure, we'll try." And that was truly, truly amazing and lucky for us, and made all the difference.
What support networks did you have in the early days?
Oh my gosh, go ahead.
And what support networks do you have now?
I really do think we were some of the luckiest people you will meet with diabetes, because, like I said, I had talked to some of these families already for the health reporting that I had done. Once or twice a year, you do the story on it's Diabetes Awareness Month, or something interesting has happened. And so I'll talk to these nice people. So I was able to call up a few families. Somebody I went to school with a long time ago, a friend of mine who I kept in touch with, lives with type 1. I was able to call him and just get some support. But it was really when Benny was in first grade that things started to change. He was the only kid in his daycare center. He was the only kid in his school. But by the end of first grade, there were 3 other children in his elementary school with type 1. And I started to reach out to those families, and we created a meetup. And then that meetup grew because of social media. And that was the beginning of kind of my in-person diabetes connections. And that's kind of where the name of the podcast comes from too, because I started writing about it and talking about it. So that was wonderful. And now, I mean, it's funny. I feel like I have a support network that's international. It's huge, the whole country. I can go someplace and find somebody. But a lot of that, I hesitate because here you are on Twitter Spaces, doing great stuff, but I feel like the online community has changed so much that I felt more supported online probably from 2010 to just before COVID, maybe, or during COVID to 2020. I actually, and we're getting off on a tangent here, I had not been on Twitter for a very long time. I took it off my phone last October, and I don't think I posted since then until this. So I came back on for this, but I feel like the online community is a little tough for me right now, but the real life community is still really good.
What technology has your son used in his years of living with diabetes, and what does he use currently?
Well, he started on MDI, multiple daily injections, and he had a blood glucose meter, and that was the first 6 months. Then he got the Animas 2020 as his first insulin pump at 2.5, and then kept that for, oh goodness, until Animas discontinued it. When he was 9, he got his first continuous glucose monitor. We got the Dexcom G4 Platinum Pediatric, I think it was called. And then he switched to the Tandem T-Slim X2, which he has kept. I think he's had that for about 8 years, maybe a little bit more. And now he uses that tandem pump with the Control IQ technology. And he just switched to the Dexcom G7. I think he's still on his first sensor, so less than 10 days ago, which has been just fine. I mean, I didn't even know he switched. I knew he went to the endocrinologist. I knew he did the software update, but he left the garbage out for me. So he did it late at night. And so when I woke up in the morning, he left the box out so I would see that he did it.
From a parent's perspective of supporting a child with diabetes, what do you perceive as the most challenging aspect of managing diabetes?
That's a tough question. It definitely changes by age. I think, though, that overall, looking back, the most challenging aspect is independence, because it's a challenge for the child and for the parent as well. I think there's this perception that we suddenly stop worrying, and that's how you do it, right? I'll let him, he goes away to college or he goes away on a big trip, and you can let him do that because you're not worried. And I don't think that's true. I think the challenge is to keep worrying because that's just parenting, and let them do it anyway, to make sure they're prepared and responsible, but not perfect. So to me, the most challenging thing was figuring out the right steps to independence. And you don't get it right. I mean, it's just in looking back that I can see what we did. But knowing when to let go a little bit, knowing when to push back and say you need to take care of XYZ, when to let things go. I mean, that's just parenting in general. But I do think that is the most challenging part of diabetes for me. I think Benny might give you a different answer, but that's been mine.
Okay, what advice would you give to other parents, and what would you tell them, or tell your past self if you were having to go through it again?
It's interesting. I think the advice I give other parents is to make mistakes, to feel okay about it, to let your kids make mistakes, because that's how they learn. There's this real quest for perfection, right? We all want super time in range, lower A1Cs. And so I think with many parents, there's this bit of an instinct to kind of limit activities, to say, well, I don't know if I want you to go on that sleepover because I know you're going to run high. I don't know if I want you to play outside in the snow. I know you're going to go low. Gosh, I just think that's terrible. So to me, like, let them go, figure out what works, what doesn't, make mistakes, live life. And you have to be responsible and you have to respect diabetes, but you do not have to be perfect. And I think for me, the advice I would give myself is to remember that every stage is not permanent. It's so hard to manage diabetes in a toddler, but then it's a different kind of hard to manage diabetes in an elementary school kid. And in middle school, I think middle school is the hardest, I'll be honest with you. In middle school is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade here. Managing differently in high school and in college, and realizing that every stage is different. The control is different, the hormones are different, their brains are different. And to kind of focus on that rather than thinking when he was 8 years old, what am I going to do when he's 18? Or what am I going to do when he's 15? I used to do that a lot. I used to look forward and think, oh no, how if he does this when he's older, this is going to be a disaster. Or I hope he keeps this up because when he's older, this would be great. So I don't know if that's an articulate answer because I'm kind of figuring out as I'm talking, but I think acknowledging that childhood is a bunch of changes. And so it's okay to not be perfect about it.
It's about living with diabetes, isn't it? Not diabetes running your life.
Yeah, I had a good friend who told me once, just remember, we're raising children, we're not raising numbers. And I thought that was a great thing to say.
Okay. The next section we were going to talk about is your books and did the feelings that you had on your son's diagnosis and throughout his life have any impact on the writing of your books? And can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, all of that led to the books for sure. So the books are The World's Worst Diabetes Mom and Still the World's Worst Diabetes Mom. And they are all about the mistakes that I made along the way. The first book is very specifically about mistakes. I give an example of something we did wrong. You run out of insulin when you're walking into a restaurant, or it's I used to have all these examples at my fingertips, travel disasters that we had. But the lesson of each chapter was just kind of like, you can do this, and here's what you learn, and here's what you learn by making these mistakes. The second book is a little bit more in depth. It's certainly more of the same because we kept making mistakes. But the first book stops at about middle school, about 6th grade. And the second book is much more about the road to independence. And it stops just as he's going to college. So that was a lot of fun. I had blogged for a long time, so I took a lot of those blog posts and rewrote them. And I talked to both of my kids. I have a daughter who is 3 years older than Benny and doesn't have diabetes. I wanted her story in there as well, because I think siblings have a lot to do with, what's going on in the family. And they have, when you have a kid, when you have a sibling with chronic condition of any kind, your life is affected as well. So it was important to me to tell their stories in a way that made sense to them and didn't really intrude on their privacy. And I'm really happy with how they came out. Benny just asked me if I was going to write one about college. And I was like, that's your story to write. Like, what's my story for diabetes in college? I packed your supplies once? No.
Can I ask, I'm butting in here, Claire. You said about preparing your son for independence. And I know this is a bit like, my mom always says this, bringing up children is making sure that they're independent adults, and then you can't complain when they are. Which, and so I suppose it is a lifetime thing. But when do you think that you started purposefully sort of training him to be independent, knowing that he would leave home at some point, be it college or whatever? It was unlikely he was going to stay at home.
Oh, well, I always say I raised my kids so they would leave. But we joke around about it a lot, but I hope they always come home. I can tell you, I know exactly when. When he was in daycare, preschool, the folks at the preschool did everything for him, right? They would he was still doing meter checks. He didn't have a CGM at the time. And he had a pump, but they would press all the buttons. And here in North Carolina, we don't have school nurses that are full-time in every school. So the staff at school has to deal with a lot of stuff. And I thought this will be a lot easier if he goes to kindergarten and he knows the basics. So we worked with the daycare center. And so he was 5 years old. He was turning 6 later that year when he went into kindergarten. And we said, and I feel kind of bad about it now, but I don't really. We said, big boys, learn how to check their own blood glucose and use their pump. And he was like, yeah, I'm a big boy. Let's do it. So everybody made it a big deal. They were super supportive about it. And so by the time he went to kindergarten, obviously he was not allowed to do it without supervision. He was very good about that. He never really tried to do anything without someone watching over him. And we set out a schedule in kindergarten that the teacher and Benny would help with. But it was all based around the school day. It wasn't really about him. It was more about fitting into their schedule. So he could use his insulin pump and he could check his blood sugar at school. Now, he didn't do that independently at home for a very long time. I didn't do that on purpose. I kind of thought, oh, he'll want to do it everywhere, but he didn't want to. And so we just thought, okay, at home, he's 5 years old. At home, we've got this, And we probably did that he used his own pump a couple of years later. We stopped looking over his shoulder in about 5th grade. But I changed his infusion sets and did his Dexcom changes until he was about 12 or 13. And I used to think, oh no, he's too old for this. But he did it everywhere else when he wasn't home. So I knew he was capable. And I think looking back, that was a really good balance because he never felt pressured. The burden wasn't 100% his until he was old enough and wanted to take it away from me. So I have milestones like that at every age. But yeah, I remember 5th grade. And then we thought, okay, we're going to have, by his senior year of high school, by 12th grade, he will be 100% independent, but we'll be here to help. And that way we'll know if he's going to be okay in college. And so that's what we did. The last year before he went away to college, I turned off Dexcom follow. I did it all. He did everything. And that was difficult for me because he was living in my house. It's easier when they're away, but in my house, I was like, are you okay? I don't see anything on my screen. And that's it's a little unusual, I have found. I thought that was a great plan. I thought lots of people would do that. I don't get a lot of enthusiasm for other parents to do that. I do think it's a great idea. It's a great test run, and your son or daughter can figure out what they need. It worked out great for us.
It's really funny. I've been away on holiday down in the coast, and I walked into a little gift shop sort of thing, and I heard Dexcom alarm, and so I'm looking at my phone thinking, I can't be low. I've gone low really fast, and I've just had lunch. And as I was pulling out my phone to look at it, the woman obviously thought I had an unusual alarm on my phone. I said, oh, no, it's my son. He's got a medical device. And so I sort of showed my Dexcom, I've got the same one. And like you say, in these weird connection that you immediately have through type 1, and he's I think he's going away to university next year, hopefully, and was chatting in that. And one of the things I said to her, I was an adult when I was diagnosed, but this is from other people, and I said, start getting him to order his own prescriptions. Start getting you're there if you're going to see if there's no insulin in the fridge, but don't leave it till he's, do you know what I mean, a fresher at college.
Yes.
A few hundred miles away. And that's just, I'd not thought of that. I said, well, sort of, not saying you dump everything on him, but it's a life skill. You start teaching them how to cook and feed themselves, and hopefully you'll teach them how to use a washing machine before he goes away. They're not going to keep him alive.
Yeah, and doing it before they leave really helps you troubleshoot what they don't know.
Yeah, I think the son's going to hate that she met me, because I think he's going to have a few extra tasks from now on. But I said, better he does it whilst you're around.
Oh my gosh.
But that was quite funny. No, that's really interesting, because I find that quite interesting, because, and as a parent, how difficult did you find it to let go in a way?
I find it very difficult, even now. Like I said, I think that I always thought the trick would be that I would stop worrying. And then my daughter, who is like a couple years older, she went away to college, and I was like, I am worried about her. No. So, I'm so sorry. I just blanked out at what the actual question was.
Well, no, how difficult did you find it?
Well,
handing over control.
Yeah. I think doing it gradually really helped.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did that that helped us was Benny wanted to go away to a summer camp. Summer camp is a big tradition in my family, and not diabetes camp. I went away for, I mean, this is a bit unusual even in the States, but my sister and I went to camp for almost a whole summer, 6 to 8 weeks away. But my father also went, like, it's just a big tradition. My husband did it, and my daughter did it. And Benny always said, oh, I want to go to that camp. And my daughter would come home every summer and say, I can't wait till you're old enough. It's going to be great. And I would think there's no way we could do this. But the camp was wonderful, very accommodating. And he went. And he went for a month from ages 9 to 15. And during that month, we did not have any CGM numbers. He went before he had a CGM, and then Follow wasn't around for a couple of years. So when he got it, we were like, do we really need it? The Wi-Fi is terrible there. He didn't want to carry a phone with him all over camp. So having that full month of him being away was really good for all of us to get used to that independence. And then when he was 16, he spent a month with that camp in Israel. And once he came home from that and had done a really great job managing, I was like, well, I'm done. Like, what do I, you went to another country. So that made it really easy to let go. But, what I worry about now is he manages well, but he doesn't manage like I would manage. And that's the toughest part, because he's 19 years old. I'm not. I am mature, and I would make different decisions. And that's, to me, is what's difficult, is just really letting go, to let him. I know he's safe. But I still want to be like, are you changing your infusion set? Are you bolusing on time? He's fine.
I always say, though, that I would be a lot better managing somebody else's type 1 than my own, because I would have more responsibility for somebody else and be more paranoid about doing things wrong. Whereas for myself, I'm a bit like, I'm still getting in, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Because I pay the consequences.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I mean, if
things go wrong, so
yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say, but in reality, we're human beings, and no one is perfect.
Oh no. But I do think that if you're doing something for somebody else,
yes.
It's like if you're helping somebody out, like somebody's ill and you say, oh, don't worry, I'll clean your bathroom for you or whatever. And I swear I do that 100 times better than I do my own, because I'm paranoid about
I think
it doesn't mean that I live in a really awful bathroom, but
I think a prime example would be like when I was younger. Like if I hit like 3.9, my mum or whatever, my mum or whoever, but quick, let's get the jelly babies. Like, it's okay. We got a couple of minutes. All is good. You know what I mean? Because I kind of understand how my body works and how I can respond to it. And I think over time, over the years of living with type 1 diabetes, you really understand that perspective, don't you? So yeah, I thought
that's a great point. And that reminded me of something else that we've done over the years. We always had to make a plan with CGM, because I didn't like just seeing the numbers. And what I mean by that is, we decided as soon as he got share, which was 6th grade, that I would text him if his blood sugar was at a certain number for a certain period of time. And that number and that period of time changed as he got older. So when he was in 7th grade, I might text if he was over 250 for more than 2 hours. But when he was 17, I would never text him if he was high, because we learned he knows he's high. He's treating, leave him alone. Or he's managing something. If he stayed high for, a few hours and he wasn't home, I would text him. I wouldn't do that now, though, but it would change over time. And I think that that's really important, as you said, because he knows he's getting alerts and alarms. He also knows how he feels. And having that conversation of, okay, what are we going to make the parameters this year? was great. I mean, I always talk about these conversations I have with Benny, and I think people sometimes feel like he sat there and said, yes, mother, what a wonderful suggestion. I am happy to implement this plan. Usually what was happening is he was like rolling his eyes at me, going, whatever you want to do is fine. Leave me alone. It's fine. It's fine.
And already thinking of ways around it.
Right.
Yeah.
But having those conversations, I think, really helped keep us close and let him know that, like, I do trust you. I think you're responsible. This is about safety. This isn't about you. I trust you. To the point where he's 19 and we still talk to each other. So I think that really helped.
It's really funny. I remember years ago, and I can't remember the name of the. Well, it wasn't a blog because it was something I listened to, and it was an American one, and it was somebody interviewing a mother and son, and I think the son was a teenager, and the interviewer said to the son something about what annoys you, sort of what's the thing, and he turned around and he said, it's when mom keeps calling me when I'm high or when I'm low, but I've treated it, I know I'm fine. And the mother sort of turned around and you could sort of see, saying, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I've already dealt with it, and then I'm getting a message from you, but I'm just waiting for it to happen, you know, things like that. And you could hear in a voice, oh, okay then. And a bit like you're saying, they were sort of on the sort of podcast, sort of debating, well, how long should I leave it before I message you then? Yeah. And it was it was really interesting hearing it, because you could see the mother had never thought of it from the son's, son was like, I've heard it alarm. I've, eaten something, or, oh, I've taken insulin, but it's not going to be instantaneous.
Yeah. It would be amazing if when they gave you a CGM, they also gave you some, psychosocial support.
Yeah.
Or a printout even of, hey, here are some conversations you might think of having. Here are some things that CGM does and does not do. Here are some things that work. And I know that's a big ask from these corporations, and we do it among ourselves. But I do feel for people who are given any kind of continuous glucose monitoring system and then just sent home, because you have to have the conversations.
But then can I be the thing from a CGM manufacturer? Maybe that's not a good thing, because they sell more if you've got paranoid parents.
Can I tell you something? And this is, I can't tell you who told me this, but somebody very high up on Dexcom. I think this has come around to bite them, because they created in their marketing. And listen, I'll say this, they sponsor my podcast. I love the product. I hope Benny never takes his off. We are huge fans of Dexcom. But they did create, and there is a sense that you may never be without one for safety reasons. There's an urgency to it. There is now a problem where people feel that so strongly that if they can't get one, if it falls off, if there are any issues, then it is treated by the community as an emergency. And so I do think there is a little bit of understanding. Like you said, they want to sell these devices, but at the same time, I'm hearing a little bit more, especially as they have the type 2 market now opening up to them. They can make all their money over there. I think they're really considering a little bit more conversation, but we'll see.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and I think I'll be honest, I've worn Dexcom since G4 and love it. It's not perfect all the time, but hey, I'll take it any day. But if I don't have one for the first few hours, I'm just testing continuously most of the time. But then I sort of relax into it, and I realise that I've survived quite well without it. And then I get to the point of when I do have access to a sensor, I'm like, I'll put it on tomorrow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see that it is a bit, you just get used to what you're used to and do that. Sorry, Claire, I took over. I always do this, Stacey.
No problem, Flipper. Just wanted to move on to where Diabetes Connections came from, and a bit about the new event that you created last year for mums. Do you want me to ask some questions, or do you just want to talk about it?
I can talk about it. You tell me.
Okay, I'll hand over to you then for the next 10 minutes. And,
no, I'll be very quick. I can do this in 90 seconds for real. So Diabetes Connections, the idea came from a talk I gave. In 2015, I was asked to speak by the JDRF chapter in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd never spoken to a JDRF group or any group, but they had found my blog and they liked it. And I said, well, I don't have a set talk. And they said, well, what do you like? What are you passionate about? And I said, in-person connections. So I created a presentation called Diabetes Connections, Why We Need Them, How to Make Them. And it's a guide. And I just gave this presentation again about 2 weeks ago. It's about how to find people in your local community, how to meet up, ways to connect, why it's important, that kind of stuff. So I did that. And then I had wanted to start a podcast for a long time. As I said, I'd worked in radio, love podcasts. I've been listening to them since you had to plug your iPod into your computer and download them. There have always been a lot of great diabetes podcasts, but the one I was looking for didn't exist. There are great places where people are telling their personal stories, but there's not a lot of news. And I wanted to change that. There's a little bit more now, but in 2015, there really wasn't. So I took my journalism background and I created Diabetes Connections, the podcast. I didn't know what to call it, so I figured, all right, that works. I don't know. I'm terrible at coming up with names. So I did that, and it's been amazing. I just absolutely love it. I started the Type 2 podcast last year after hearing from a lot of people that they felt that community really wanted to learn more about changes. There's so much new stuff with Type 2, whether it's medications or, as we already mentioned, CGMs. Omnipod and Tandem are trying to get their pumps cleared for Type 2. So this community has a lot of questions. So again, with the names, Diabetes Connections, Type 2. The My Side Out event was a little different. I started that in January of 2023. And my original intent was to make it a book launch party. The World's Worst Diabetes Mom book was coming out, and I wanted to do something fun for the moms in the Charlotte area where I live. So I started to put together just a fun night with cocktails and crafts. I really like to learn about the technology, so I started asking some of the local vendors that I know, the representatives from the pump companies and Dexcom and Abbott, if they would come. And everybody liked the idea, so we made it kind of a mini conference. Got a speaker. It was really fun, and I did that in January of 2023. Of course, we posted it online, and I started hearing from moms all across the country who said, can you bring that to me? And my husband and I sat down and said, can we do this? Does this make sense? And we wanted to give it a go. So we did 3 events in 2023. We're doing 4 this year. I think we're going to do 4 next year. And it's been really exciting. It's very unique because moms, we, generally speaking, we don't have diabetes. Some of the moms do, and that's fine. But we are not the same as people with diabetes, right? We don't have diabetes. We have a different experience. But we need support too in a different way. And a lot of these moms are the decision makers in their families. They are making decisions about their 6-year-old or their 2-year-old, and they need support. So there was nothing like it that I knew of. I still don't know of anything like it in the country. And I'm really excited that I've done it. And the response has just been great. And the next one is in Colorado in September. And then we're going to be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in October.
That sounds really, really interesting and really, really worthwhile, Stacey.
Thank you.
I'm just butting in again.
Come on in.
I can't keep quiet. Do in the States, in the UK, JDRF or Breakthrough Type 1 now, forever JDRF to me, probably a bit like Twitter. We have here Discovery Days that they run in-person events where they have the manufacturers there, like a tech exhibition, and then they have talks and speakers. Plus, they also have some breakout sessions.
Yes, they call those the Type 1 Nation Summits here.
Oh, okay.
They are wonderful.
Yeah,
I've spoken at a couple this year, and they are just great. But the difference for me is, having attended a lot of these, is that you have your children with you. And I say that carefully because that's great. But you have your children with you.
Yeah.
So you're very distracted, especially if you have, if I just remember, we went to so many events where I couldn't listen to the speaker or I couldn't talk to the vendor because I had to take care of my kids, not just Benny, but, Leah needed something, or somebody was uncomfortable, or they were hot, or they were grumpy, or they were happy and wanted to show me something. And so those events are great, but they're not what this is all about.
No. And I suppose, like, following on from that, being parents, carers of somebody with type 1, I agree with you. Need support like everybody, because your life is changed through it, and things like that. But I suppose also there are topics that you wouldn't want to talk about in front of your child.
Yeah, 100%. There's topics you don't talk about in front of them. And also, we've found that the technology companies, the vendor fair at our events, people have much more in-depth conversations. Yeah. Because they can. They're not worried about their kids running around. So it's great. Like, I just think you need all of it, right? It's a wonderful thing. I wish there were events for adults with type 1. I wish there were events for dads of kids with type 1. I wish there were just events for teens and college age students. There's a lot of stuff that individual niches of the community could really benefit from.
Yeah, it's quite JDRF here. I think it was a couple of years ago now. They had an event, and at the breakout sessions, they split you up into parents and families,
yes,
children, adolescents, and adults. And actually, it was really interesting because the conversations were different.
Yes, 100%.
And quite rightly. But no, sounds like an amazing thing.
Thank you.
It just goes to show that the importance of peer support on everybody who's got connections with diabetes.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, Stacey, so I've just got one question left to ask you. What are your hopes and aspirations for yourself and diabetes care and management for the future?
I'll give you a really realistic one, and then we can do pie in the sky. My hopes for my son and for people with diabetes is that they can live whatever life they want to live. The life they would have lived without diabetes. Like, I don't care if, neither one of my kids are training to go up on Mount Everest. Nobody's an Iron Man. Nobody's, a genius. They're both great kids, but like, I want them to have really great ordinary lives. That's really what I want for Benny with diabetes. He'd be mad. He'd say, if he heard me say that, he'd be like, I'm amazing. I'm a genius. What are you talking about? But I think it's just important. Sometimes we focus on the superstardom. Look at this entertainer, or this football star, or this rock star. I mean, I just want my kids to live great, ordinary lives if that's what they want. So that's what I hope. And I think the automated insulin delivery systems are so great. Benny does so well with those. They've made college a lot less stressful for me because I do think he's a lot safer. But, it still means that he's changing equipment. He's got 2 sites on his body at all times. He's got stuff weighing him down. He just this morning, he left for work, came right back in. Whoop, my pump's not charged. Got to take a charger with me. That kind of stuff. I mean, big picture. I'm not a person that thinks the cure is around the corner. I do think that they will find a cure for type 1. I don't know if it'll be in my son's lifetime. Autoimmune conditions hasn't been a cure yet for any autoimmune condition. So it's really difficult. But a functional cure, maybe it's going to be smart insulin where he takes 1 injection a day. I know that sounds like a lot, but I've asked him, and I mean, imagine taking 1 injection a day, and then you don't even have to check your blood sugar. That to me is fantastic, unbelievable, right? Glucose responsive insulin is what I'm supposed to call it. Sorry, not smart insulin. I just spoke to somebody from my podcast. Is that around the corner? No, but I think in 10 years that could be a possibility. That's and that's great. But I want it faster? Sure. Do I think islet cells are coming? Yup. I think the transplantation is going to be better and better. I don't know how we'll pay for any of that, but I think it's coming. I'm very optimistic about a lot of things, but I mean, and really small term, really like in the moment, I hope that my son, and I guess everybody, really finds the peer support that they need He does not seek out any kind of in-person diabetes support right now. There's a really great chapter of the Diabetes Link at his college that used to be called the College Diabetes Network. And when we kind of announced on social media where he was going to college, and they reached out to me and said, "Oh, we're here for him." And he was like, "Yeah, I'm not doing that." I really wish he did, but that's, if he runs out of insulin, he'll find them. I'm not too worried about that. But he does have a good friend who just happens to have type 1. And I'm sure they don't talk about diabetes, but they just exist near each other. And I know that makes a difference for him. So I hope he always has that kind of peer support and knows that he can find other people for his support. Because as we kind of started out talking about that, right? There's just nothing like the community. I don't know how anybody, I can't imagine going through this alone. And I hope everybody can find something like that.
Time in happiness against time in rage.
Time in happiness is the best. Yes.
I know.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on and joining us tonight, Stacey. Just one final thing. If people want to reach out to you, how would they do that? And how would they get your books if they want to read your books?
Sure. Okay. So the best way is the website diabetes-connections.com. I am not regularly on Twitter, so I know this is or on X, so I know this is happening there. But I'm easier to find on Instagram. I'm Stacey Simms on Instagram. I'm Diabetes Connections on Facebook and on Threads. No, I'm Stacey Simms on Threads. Who can keep track? But you can also email me, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com. If you're interested in the books, please contact me before you buy them, because if you want an audio copy, I read the audiobooks and I can give those for free. I have a really cool deal going on right now with Audible. So I think, I can do UK. I can, but you have to I have to give you a promo code and a thing. I have to send it to you. So if that's something you're interested in, you can feel free to share that. I'm limited. I can't remember how many per month, but it's pretty generous. And I still get paid. So I don't know how Audible does that, but I'm happy to share that with you all.
Thank you very much for that, Stacey. Has anybody got any quick questions before Stacey goes? No, can't see anybody with the hand up or anybody typing anything in. But thank you very much. It's been a really interesting evening, Stacey.
Thank you all. This is amazing that you do this, and I'm honored to be asked, and I really appreciate it. Have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, no, it was lovely talking to you, and love your attitude, Stacey. You sound very like my own mum.
That's all we can do. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stacey.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.